All right, well, here we are, Scott and Melissa from NBKC Bank. I am really pleased to have you guys out today. Why don't you guys introduce yourself? I know I'm not exactly sure what your titles are. I think CTO and Chief Deposit Officer, right?
Yep.
Correct.
Okay, so let's go. Scott Ramon, how long have you been with the bank and what's your background?
Yep, 2.5 years at NBKC. Prior to that was really in the software industry in general, but specifically at a high frequency trading firm for 9 years. And then prior to that, I had a company called Perceptive Software, which became
okay.
Lexmark.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then all roads lead to Cerner. So it was sort of a Cerner software developer right out of college.
Cool.
So and even further back, went to College, University of Illinois, studied computer science there.
Right on. Mm-hmm. Good deal. Well,
Fighting
Melissa?
Illini.
That's right.
Nice.
And then he came to the dark side. He's a banker now.
Yeah, so I didn't really know how much baggage apparently there is with that term. Or the title of being a banker, and never really had considered myself a banker.
We're not wearing a suit.
No, and so I still don't feel like one. I guess, the fact that I work at a bank makes me a banker, but I'm not like taking people's money or depositing it anywhere. I'm building software. So,
Yeah.
Still don't feel like one, but I guess, I'll wear the title with pride if I need to.
Right on. Good deal.
Being a banker is cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Melissa Eggleston, Chief Deposit Officer. What's your background? How long you been at the bank and how'd you get there?
Sure. So this is actually my 5th year at NBKC. Holy cow.
Wow.
I know it went really fast. We
were
met.
having lunch with you at the Mission Farms Tavern like your first couple of weeks.
Yes.
Wow.
So 5 years.
Wow.
5 years.
Man.
So it went really, really fast. My entire career has been in banking, community banking, so banks of different sizes. Prior to NBKC, which at NBKC I lead the deposit channel, so all things focused on customer experience, our branch locations, our nationwide digital platform, and then our Fintech partnerships. So that's sort of my scope and reach at the bank, and I have teams that align across those channels. But most of my career has been in a client-facing or customer-facing role, serving customers, small, big, on the business side, consumer side, and really had entered out of college into banking. And here I am. Well, actually, I was a teller in high school. So,
no kidding.
Yeah, so it just sort of goes way back for me.
And you have brought a couple of people with you, right? Evan's still at the bank, right?
Yep. So Evan's still at the bank.
Evan's a neat dude.
Leads product development for us on the deposit side. Brian Baird, who he joined the bank shortly after I joined. He actually leads our partnership group, who works day in and day out with our Fintech partners. So
cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm dying to talk to you guys about just a number of topics. I sent a bunch of things over email, but let's dive right in. So, the topic of this podcast is digital first. We're talking to, tech leaders, industry leaders, entrepreneurs about how they're managing digital transformation, right? In all types of businesses, e-commerce, B2B, SaaS, and whatever. So how is a bank, a local bank, managing that shift across your organization?
You want to start? You want me to start?
To me, it starts with sort of the products that we offer our customers. And so as we transition more toward a digital first experience, then, it becomes mostly about products. And I'll let Melissa kind of dive into that a little bit more, but and then I think once you get past the product offerings, there's actually a lot more behind the scenes, a lot of really rich data sets, a lot of really interesting insights that we can gather from our customers, being kind of digitally oriented. Then, so there's like sort of the superficial product offerings, and then sort of the second dimension that kind of comes through after the fact.
And how many locations you guys have right now? Is it?
4. 4. So 4 locations in Kansas
City. And it was 6 or 7, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, that branch attrition was really a result of some leases and, just strategic footprint. So it didn't necessarily align with our digital approach. But I would say if I were to just take a step back and think about like how we've thought about digital as a community bank, because that word is sort of all encompassing.
Yep.
Scott is a part of that picture, like being really, really intentional about hiring people who are tech focused, right? Who just naturally understand what it looks like to develop software, have a team that does that.
Yeah.
But outside of that, just say, we have a desire and a focus to extend our brand outside of the Kansas City metro.
Yeah.
And that was a real driving force when I joined the bank. I mean, shortly after my arrival, we, within a year, had extended our consumer footprint to a nationwide offering.
Yep.
And then a slow follow was the business side of the house. But so it does go back to product, but also I think there's a disposition to a longer term strategy as well, that pure business strategy.
Yeah, I remember one time, I feel like it's a Christmas event or something, but Brian Unruh, as CEO, said, NBKC is a technology company that happens to be a bank. So let's unpack that a little. Like, how a lot of companies say that, but you guys seem to be really doing it. I mean, we'll get into it a little bit later. I'll talk about the Fintech Accelerator and some of the tech you guys are building in-house, but how does a bank think about themselves as a tech company first and a bank, sort of around that?
Yeah, I think it's a big topic. I think that really, almost every company today in today's economy is a tech company to some extent.
Yeah.
So to what degree our services are different than the next bank, maybe fluctuates based on our product offerings or whatever, but also fluctuates based on how we view technology and how we want to deliver those products.
Yeah.
And so to that regard, I think that insofar as our product offering is better or more full featured or more convenient or better user experience, because we are offering it in a particular way through technology, that's kind of where we see that bleed through.
Yeah.
And that can be anything from, the products that our customers use, like we were just talking about, but even things on the backside that are more, maybe there's some automation that makes things quicker, less error prone. All those things come together to provide a sort of more cohesive, more user-friendly, more easy customer experience. Yeah. And so it's because we're enabling that through technology, I think that does kind of put us squarely in that camp of we're primarily a company that provides services through technology. Those services happen to be banking. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I was actually listening to this guy, Scott Galloway. I don't know if you follow him or not. He's a financial analyst and he's a professor at NYU. And he made a comment not too long ago on some show he was on, and they were talking about like the different sectors of the stock market. It's like, the tech sector and the financial sector and the retail sector. And he was talking about how his thesis was that there is no tech sector. Yeah. Like the tech is just sort of underlying in all of the sectors. And this talk about, well, tech is up or down is sort of irrelevant. Every company is a tech company. It's
across.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same as media right now, too. I mean, every company is a media company right now.
Right.
So interesting. Well, so one of the things that I've noticed over the last, 5 years or so working with the bank is, just the commitment to culture. I mean, you guys have some amazing people that work at the bank. And as a a partner of the bank, somebody that works with the bank, we're an outsider, if you will, but we get treated like we're sort of part of that culture almost, which is cool. How do you guys think about culture? And is it, this is sort of a leading question, but do you guys think about culture as a product?
Interesting. Yeah. Well, culture is so hard to define, right? I mean, we as an executive team sometimes have a challenge just like putting our finger. We have like words or just feelings that sort of come out of conversations about, our teams and the company at large. But I think it is something that we're packaging. Yeah. I mean, if you think about, it's a really, really competitive market today for talent across every part of the bank. Yeah. And so if culture being a defining factor and someone making a choice to come work somewhere, I mean, I think that certainly can be productized, right? Our chief people officer, Jessica Eggers, she's like really, really focused on the onboarding experience and making sure people are coming on board and really understanding what it means and looks like to work at NBKC. Yeah. Now, with that said, like a lot of companies, we're not going to be the place for everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the words that come to mind, fast paced, dig in, figure it out, problem solver. I mean, some of them are buzzy, but like we live and breathe that, like figure it out.
Yeah.
There's always this notion of, being behind, like we just haven't figured out the right next thing yet. And so there's always this constant, like, let's keep up. Yeah. And so I think that's a cultural aspect, but then also listening, right? If we, especially through the pandemic, we have done an immense amount of listening, polling, and understanding, surveying our employees as they're working from home, what's important, what's challenging. And so I think that remains to be a key part of that. And our growth has been exponential over the last, 18 months.
Mm-hmm. How many employees are there now?
I think we're at 435 or 450. Okay. So I think we hired over 100 people over the last year. Does that amount sound right, Scott?
Sounds right, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, you just start thinking about we have 80 people. Let's call it 80 people who haven't been into a location, our headquarters location, which you just start thinking about how that can impact.
Oh, they haven't been there
ever
since they started.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so it really creates unique challenges and opportunities for us as leaders to say, how do we manage through these kind of things, and how does culture remain intact? So,
are you guys having meetings at the office like as needed, or is it just shut down?
It's pretty much been shut down. We have essential workers, right? We have people at our branch location serving customers on a daily basis and things like that. But in general, it's been work from home, lots of Zoom meetings, lots of team meetings, that kind of deal. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's been a challenging year for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, once you get up above, he's at 430. Once you get above, we're at 15 and culture is hard.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I can't imagine at that scale.
I think it's one of the most important things that we can focus on as a company, especially at our size, is retaining that culture, because that's what keeps our best employees there, and we're no better than our best employees.
Yeah.
And we think about our culture sometimes as being sort of fun, energetic, or whatever, but I think it's also very much so a competitive atmosphere. It's an atmosphere where, I think about being on the lead lap a lot. We want to be on the lead lap of a lot of different topics, especially in our mortgage division. The areas that are highly competitive, and so it's this really kind of fun culture of, everyone says work hard, play hard. It is embodied in the sort of the funness that we get from, a putting green, in the building, but then also, a conversation outside the putting green about how are we going to get this next thing done, because we're afraid that if we don't, we're going to get passed up by, competitor XYZ or something. So
there's this notion of winning, right? I mean, like, I think a lot of people on the teams just generally like to, win.
Yeah.
Right.
Internally, externally, or both?
I think, so back to competitiveness, right? I think it's both, right? People like being part of a winning team, or the group that's being, moving the ball forward at.
That's great. I mean,
so, but that creates its own challenges, right?
Yeah.
Because you sometimes don't relish in the thing that you created or have done, because you're,
trying to win the next round.
The other thing that I would say about culture is each team sort of has their own like subcultures, right? I mean, when you're that big, right, every team just sort of embodies their own little subculture that essentially bleeds into, good company culture. And so it'll be interesting when we come back to the office as we start coming back in later this summer. I think a lot of people have missed that fun, happy hour, like getting together, speaker series in person kind of stuff that we do.
Yeah. I mean, I miss that. I miss being in, I've been to some fun events over there.
Yeah.
That's a neat place. I mean, a lot of it starts with Brian too, right? I mean, you guys have a leader that exudes culture. You know, I remember the first time I met Brian, I actually still have a little wood bat that he gave me. First time I met him, and you know, I mean, I would walk through a wall for that guy. Like he's just one of those guys. It's like, I'll whatever you want to do. Like I'm in. Yeah. You know, so I could see how he, you know, and it's you can tell like with the leaders that he's brought in around him that's, you know, that is strategic. Like he knows how to hire people that think like that.
Yep.
Well, so let's get into. Well, one more question about culture. So you got one of the things that I'm interested to hear, and you may not be able to talk too much about it, but organizationally, you guys are a functional organization, right? You have business unit leaders, and then you have, you know, tech and whatever else. How does that? How do you guys get things done? Do you have like Evan is the head of product, right? Like how do projects come from concept to execution and get done across business lines without shit going haywire? Or does it?
No, it never does.
I'm like, faster? Can we get that faster? Like, come on, Scott.
Sure. Well, certainly it starts with a need, and that perceived need is, you know, communicated as best it can. Usually that communication happens in community. So there's meetings and things like that where we just talk about what's the story around this need. Yeah. Eventually that gets boiled down into use cases that can be, you know, written down essentially. So how do we write the story down? Yeah. And then if we can write the story down, then we can start picking it apart and trying to figure out how to deliver.
Do you follow any sort of like, like a Scrum or Kanban or a hybrid version of that, or just
I mean, like most development organizations, we have our own sort of riff on all of those. And so, you know, one thing that's odd about us is we don't do formal sprints. Interesting. But I feel like it positions us to be a little bit more responsive to the needs of the business that way.
Have you ever done sprints?
I've been in organizations that have done sprints. We have not done them formally at the bank. Okay. It's not to say we never will. Yeah. It's just something that I don't feel like we need right now. Yeah. I think it would detract from some things.
Interesting.
So there's give and take with all of those decisions. And sometimes you have to think about the way that and honestly, if we were going to do something a little bit more formal, like time box sprints, 2-week sprints or whatever, we probably would deploy it in one area of the business and not another. Like we might approach our mortgage division with a sprint-oriented workflow and our deposit division without. And so even mixing and matching, again, it's geared more toward how the business needs to be led and needs to be communicated with around projects.
Interesting. Yeah, we could talk for hours about the concept of sprints and no sprints. I mean, I've worked in medium-sized companies and startups and, you know, 1 to 2 person projects, and you know, have done 8-week sprints, 2-week sprints, no sprints. And it's really interesting how it, you know, how different each organization handles that concept. And I think an organization's ability to iterate on that and do things differently. Like one team might like a 2-week sprint and one team might like an 8-week sprint. We've got a model here that's kind of interesting where we don't do sprints either for like regular stuff, right? Like our day-to-day, workload is just like I guess in theory it's Kanban, but it's just like a big backlog on the left and things get picked off and done, you know, and that never changes. There's no end or beginning. But what we found that works really well is for specific like projects or innovation type work, or when we're trying to prove a theory or experiment with something, we'll time box it, you know, because you can get really out of hand if it's like, oh, we want to build this thing, and then all of a sudden you're 10 weeks into it and nothing's gotten built and no one knows who's running what. And so we for experimental type stuff, we have like a 4-week kind of a process where it's like, we'll define our constraints, decide what we're trying to do, what's the story, and then cap it at a dollar amount and a time box. You know, and we have to release it in that time box.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think that what you've recognized is different types of projects require different types of structure, and different types of thought processes require different structure. Yeah. And that's true. And I'm always willing to be wrong about the way that we approach projects.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, is just to be very sensitive to things that aren't functioning well.
Yeah.
And then kind of pivoting or adapting based on what your sensation is around that. So if you're delivering product and you're delivering it in a timely fashion, then what's working is working.
Yeah.
If there's some evidence to the contrary, then perhaps you need to rethink.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that a team's ability to do like a proper, even if you're doing sprints or not, but like a proper redux or, evaluation process at the end, and be honest with each other about what went wrong. Like if a team can do that well, then you have a good team.
Yep.
But if at the end of it, it's, a blame game, well, like this person didn't get me this on this such and such date, and, things can get bad really quick.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a difference between being truly curious about how a process really worked or sort of trying to just explain it.
Good point. Yeah, for sure.
Right? One's more sort of question oriented and one's sort of like excuse oriented.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, well, so let's dive into the accelerator. What did you learn from that? Actually, first, for the audience that may not be familiar with it, tell us about the accelerator, why you did it, what you learned, and then where it's going, or is it going?
Sure. So I'll start in on that. So the accelerator really was birthed from just this curiosity around Fintech and what that really meant for financial services. So pre the accelerator, just rewind, let's call it 3 or 4 years. As a local community bank serving, primarily local customers, we're like, okay, this ecosystem, there's some players in this ecosystem that are non-banks, right? They're pushing the envelope. They're challenging banks to be better. They're taking what banks would say was market share from them, right? They were boarding users, think of Venmo, those kind of players where they were just basically the place where, customers were holding funds. And so at the time, from a strategic standpoint, Brian, our CEO, just challenged us all on the executive team to think about how we just learn and understand more about financial technology companies, what kind of disruptors we should really be considering in our business. And
that's not normal.
Yeah.
Most bank CEOs aren't thinking that way.
Yeah, you start sort of looking around though, and you read headlines and you read enough, you're thinking, well, why aren't they? Yeah. Right? Why aren't other bankers seeing these threats that maybe we see? And maybe it's just how we look at the world. I don't know. Maybe it's our aptitude for placing, bringing technology alive internally, or frankly, just our desire to be curious. I'm not sure. But, our one thing that we haven't really touched on, our mortgage business has been around for 20 plus years, and they've always served customers through technology all across the country. And so we've been real early adopters of technology, period. Yeah. And so that curiosity, I think, has just been ingrained in who we are for years and years. Yeah. And so fast forward to financial technology companies, really coming on the scene. We just said we need to be a part of that. We need to figure out how to be a part of that. Yeah. Eric Garrettson, our CFO, loves to say, Brian banned anyone on the management team from going to banker conferences. Okay. The shticky, like, here's what's going on in the industry. You're rubbing elbows with the guys with suits and ties on. Right. Yeah. And that is a distinction too. We're not wearing suits and ties. It's sort of dressed for the day. We've both got jeans on. I mean, just, that's who we are. And, so that old adage of like being a traditional banker had thrown out the window. Yeah. And figuring out a way to be involved in the ecosystem. And so we started going to different conferences, really putting ourselves out there, learning. We had a lot of people early on just sort of educate us on their business, like how they were building technology, how they were boarding users, why they thought it had legs, and, all those kind of things. And then from there, we started in on some partnerships, right, where we're basically providing banking as a service. We're the bank behind some of these financial technology companies. And out of that we think that there's a bigger opportunity here in Kansas City, specifically bringing maybe some tech talent from around the country to Kansas City. And that's really how Fountain City Fintech was born.
Yep.
We just felt like there was a real opportunity to be an incubator for and really close partner with some early stage and middle stage companies who are trying to build a product and needed a bank partner.
And how many ended up happening? You did 2?
Yes, we had 2 cohorts. Okay. Yep. And ultimately it was really interesting timing. But we had just decided right before the pandemic that we weren't going to continue a 3rd cohort. I don't think it's totally, dead forever.
Yeah.
But so it would have been very challenging, I think, for us to pull off a lot of accelerators still continued on and they moved all that forward, but it just happened to be that kind of timing. But
you guys were bringing people here to KC and a bank's not built for that, right? An accelerator that is an accelerator, and that's what they do is probably built there for that, right? But been hard probably to do that.
But we had office hours. I mean, when you think about what is the value? What really is the value for these members of the cohort coming to Kansas City to be in a bank building on our 3rd floor, which we had space built out for them. It was cool space. But the value was they had access to myself and Scott on the tech side, just understanding about banking, right?
Yeah.
Brian, we made introductions as appropriate, and we had a Zach Pettit ran our accelerator for the 2 years. He was pretty ingrained in things here in Kansas City and was able to make good introductions for people and just honestly showcase our city. A lot of people from the coast do not recognize how cool Kansas City is. It is a real thing.
Oh yeah.
So
best kept secret in the country.
You're a flyover state. Not really.
Yeah.
No, we're better than that.
Yeah.
So, and I'm a transplant and I'm even saying that, 10 or 11 years later.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, honestly, is because I think there's just, I think it's probably becoming more and more known, but there's some cool shit happening in Kansas City.
For sure.
A lot of neat tech going on here. So I was pretty interested in the whole thing, and I selfishly hope you guys ramp it up again.
I don't think it's dead forever, right?
Yeah.
Our commitment to just fintech and technology around financial services, and that includes our mortgage and all our mortgage business and all kinds of things. That is far from over, right?
Yeah.
The hosting a cohort right now and really putting a plan around an accelerator. Just the sheer manpower and planning that's involved in that is something that is can be challenging.
Yeah, it's good for our culture though, and I selfishly kind of would hate to see it go for good, of course. And frankly, it was a piece in that one of the things that attracted me to NBKC too was that a bank, not only do they say that they're sort of forward thinking and more technology sort of aware and advanced, than many banks, but here they're actually building programming around that to get back to the fintech community, really kind of putting their money where their mouth is in a sense. And that was a big deal for me as I was considering a transition. So it was good.
That's cool. Mm-hmm. All right. So you guys have invested a lot of time, energy, and into branding and just brand in general. How do you guys think about brand? How does the bank think about brand? How does, where is that headed?
You want me to take that one?
Yeah, you take that.
Well,
what is brand?
Yeah,
right?
like every brand, it's an evolution, right? You look back 5 years ago, we've leaps and bounds from where we were then. I think, so outside of product, because that's an easy place to go, right? I think of our brand as sort of the outward promises that we make to our end users or customers, right? It's really about the brand promise.
Yep.
So we're all, a lot of our conversation has been centered around technology and how we leverage that to serve customers better or create a better experience, what we hope is a better experience. But ultimately, there is this center of the universe around people too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if Chad was here, who leads our mortgage home loan group, he would say that we're a commodity, banking is a commodity. I agree with him on that. So there are only certain places you can differentiate yourself, right? Product is one. Let's just assume that's an easier playing field, pretty level. Like everybody's going to have, sort of have to have table stakes things.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to people.
Yeah.
And the ability for those people to translate the brand promise, which ultimately becomes your brand.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, do we want to look and feel cool? Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we want all of those things, right? I mean, we want people to go to our website and say, wow, that's pretty neat for a bank, right? That kind of stuff. Because people do have these preconceived notions about like bankers are just sort of stuffy, and that's so from a brand perspective, we're going to go as far away from looking and feeling like a traditional bank as we can, but then also that those brand promises hopefully come alive as we think about the service, the people that are underlying the brand. So
brand's a tricky thing, man, because and I've said a lot of times that I don't think brand it really exists. And coming from a marketing person, that's like people are like, what do you mean? But to me, brand is, it's not really like a logo or colors or typography, but it's like you said, it's people. It's about, what your. I think a lot, and I've done this a lot too. Made this mistake, but I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that brand is something that you define.
Yeah.
Right. And it's something that your customers define.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
yes.
Whatever your customers think of you, that's your brand.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you just think, our eyeballs are on reviews all the time, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's, the Amazon effect, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, the brand is also what everybody's saying about you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's that. And so the more people have access to, on demand, anything, information, the brand will have to continue to evolve and will be challenged by making sure that we can keep up with that. So
how do you balance the NBKC thing with the fact that it isn't necessarily a Kansas City bank, but at the same time, you want to tell that story about how it's ingrained in Kansas City and community, and that's obviously important. What's that tightrope like?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We don't talk about it very much. I mean, when you really think about NBKC, it's just like, well, it probably stands for something. Yeah. I mean, for non-local people, right?
Yeah.
But it's not even something that we really address. Yeah. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. Yeah. Right? People in Kansas City, I'm assuming, think it stands for something Kansas City. But outside of that, it's sort of, I mean, you go out on a website right now and you type in checking account, open a checking account online, right? You're going to see all these other brands where they have names and you're just like, that doesn't really make sense to me, that name. It's just like a name. So I think that there is just this notion from consumers right now that maybe there isn't anything behind it. Yeah. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know what your take is on that, but
yeah, I mean, it bleeds through, like our Kansas City location bleeds through in some of our communication and our website, things like that. But I essentially agree. If you use our app, and you do basic banking functions, you never really will see that stuff.
Yeah.
It's only the folks that are maybe trying to find ATM locations or like a branch location where we start to see maps of Kansas City and that sort of thing. So I do think it's a little bit of a tightrope, but I don't think it's one that, a misstep here or there is it's
not keeping anybody up
damaging.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I'd say local market, like here in Kansas City, we are sort of a sleeper sometimes. Like a lot of people just aren't aware of how long we've been around, who we are. There certainly are people that would have no idea that we have 450 employees and that we're doing a lot of the things that we're doing. And I think that's good and bad sometimes, right? Yeah. I don't think we can't win. We're never going to build locations on every corner. That's just not who we are as a bank.
Yeah.
And so we would never win that game.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we can win in other spots like technology advancements, product enhancements, reach, nationwide reach.
Yeah.
And so those are just things we put eggs in those baskets versus some of maybe the other more traditional approaches on banking.
What about content and media? Is that part of your culture yet? Or is that something that is on the radar?
We've talked a lot about it.
Yeah.
I think, I'll let you take that one. I don't know how you think that plays out.
I don't know. I think that we would not consider ourselves experts in those fields, right? So we rely on folks like you guys, or to sort of help us along there.
Yeah.
And how that plays out, I think we've yet to see.
Yeah.
I think there's a place for it, right? It's just making sure. So I think there is this notion of like, what do people really want their bank to do for them? Like what, and maybe this goes back to brand, and these are my personal opinions, right
good.
now. Okay. So I don't want to say this is like a company opinion, but I mean, it's really, you're providing a safe service for me that I really just want to work. I want to be able to do the things I want to do. And so there is this chasm that I have, and it could be an age thing as well, where I'm not going to go necessarily to my bank to be like the source of truth around life things.
Yeah.
And so I think that probably goes back to like lifestyle brands or just like utility brands. And I'm probably not using official terminology there on the marketing side, but I think you probably understand where I'm going. That's
an interesting point. Like, I think what you're saying is your bank is something you don't want to think about.
Yeah.
If your bank is on your mind, then something either might be wrong. Like either the check didn't clear, or you're not going. I don't know.
Well, I think you see that in a lot of the fintechs that are kind of popping up here.
Yeah.
The notion of consistency, of simplicity, of providing a uniform, cohesive service.
Yeah.
So it's not this type of product for this function, this type of product for that function.
Yeah.
It's this idea of an overarching solution to finances.
Yeah.
Like the term sort of self-driving wallet is one that I really like, which is, like, okay, I've got this money. I don't know what exactly to do with it. So I'm going to turn it into you. You are the smart person. You go figure it out, bank.
Yeah.
And I don't even really need to know the details.
Yeah.
I just need to know that you know what you're,
doing.
So.
That and ease of being able to move money, from one place to another is, probably, I would imagine a big thing on people's minds.
But I also do think that people want to be assimilated with cool. Okay. I think there's a reason people have a bunch of Apple phones, right?
For sure.
I mean, there is that Halo brand, sort of like I bank somewhere cool,
for sure.
or I have this cool thing. And so we have to continue to figure out how to marry those, like being a bank and being cool.
Yeah, I think I like that idea.
I do think we're cool, but
for sure.
I want our customers to think that.
Everyone
right?
thinks they're cool.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Well, speaking of being cool, it's hotter than hell.
It's warm.
One more question, and we'll wrap. I have to. I got to ask about crypto. Like, what from a banking perspective? Like, what are you guys? What are you thinking about? What's happening? Because it's shit's getting weird.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And Bitcoin's at $60,000 today.
Yeah, so I don't really follow. Like, he's gonna probably be more equipped to speak to the like what's happening in the craze of like values and stuff. I can probably address it relative to where I think it fits into.
Are customers asking about it?
Not really. Probably I think they're going to other platforms and finding it. I don't think people are coming to their banks to do that. Yeah. I mean, frankly, like it is still not an area. It's sort of like the marijuana industry, right? Like
Yeah.
there are just pockets of businesses that are a little higher risk for banks to interact with.
Yeah.
Crypto is sort of one of those. I think the regulatory landscape will over time evolve.
Yeah.
But that's a slow trudge, right?
Yeah.
And so for us as a bank, for example, to be really, really comfortable with crypto, I mean, we'd have to really, really dig in. So we're not really facilitating the purchasing of that. I think there are some banks that just know they know exactly how to do that, and they're playing in that space. But we don't have a lot of. I think people are just going outside of what I would consider their normal banking relationships and purchasing crypto on like Coinbase and other places like that.
Yeah, I think it's just people don't expect it to be a currency at this point. It's more of an investment or like a trading instrument is sort of the way that I see it. So you've got large money managers or broker dealers who are starting to hold crypto or allow investments in crypto. Even yesterday there was an announcement, I think, by Morgan Stanley. And those are really interesting trends. It does seem like the enthusiasm around crypto kind of fluctuates with the price of Bitcoin in particular. And that's to be expected. You know, there's a sense of, missing out and seeing other people get wealthy, right? We've also seen that in the meme stocks. I think that though, Bitcoin in particular has some drawbacks as a currency, as it purports to be a currency, and that it's just it's highly volatile. You can imagine someone's not being comfortable with their net worth swinging around a lot based on what? On speculation, as opposed to some sort of monetary policy change or whatever, what we see with the U.S. dollar. And the U.S. dollar itself really is. I mean, we transact digitally almost exclusively at this point. I mean, especially throughout the pandemic. I haven't been to an ATM in probably a year. My
physical cash is
just not. No one wants to take it. No one wants to deal with it, and so it ends up feeling a lot like a digital currency. Of course, the basis for how that currency is minted and supply and all that stuff is way different compared to something like Bitcoin. So I think what ends up happening is the differentiating factor between the U.S. dollar and something like Bitcoin ends up being something that a lot of people really don't care about, which is something like fiscal policy, monetary policy, and the combination of just printing, inflation, and all that stuff. So,
the fact that you can't really pay for anything with it. I mean, you. I guess in theory you can, right? You can sell it. It would be then.
It's not easy though. I mean, you can't walk into Starbucks and buy a cup of coffee.
So I mean, here's a really practical example. You want to buy a house, okay? You have to put a down payment on the house. I don't see I don't see a world at this moment where you could actually say, I have whatever it is in Bitcoin, and that is my down payment, or even thinking about having to prove like an asset or something for some type of loan. That
was a question I had for you is how close do you think we are, or will it ever happen in a scenario where, like say you need a business loan, right? Say you need a line of credit, and you've got $500,000 worth of Bitcoin, but the bank's they're not gonna care about that, right? You can't use it to borrow money yet, anyways.
Well, right? I suppose if it's in some type of securities portfolio that. Because, we could look at marketable securities as a form of an extension of credit, right? That portfolio has value. We would, loan a percentage of that. So I suppose if somehow it's indicated in that kind of frame, maybe it'll just be really interesting. I mean, it's all about the assignment of value and really, from a bank's perspective, could we liquidate that and actually offset a loan if needed? And, that's sort of the whole theory around it.
The haircut that you'd have to apply to something like that, it would be significant because of the volatility. I think to me, there's this hurdle that, something like Bitcoin has to get past being what I would consider to be a collectible. It's sort of like people are holding it because they think the value will be greater in years to come than it is now. And so,
that's so
I can essentially make money on that transaction, as opposed to holding it to buy a pack of gum or buy a coffee or buy a house or buy a car. Yep. I mean, some people have found themselves with immense wealth, and so they would like to do those things with the wealth that they've generated. But those folks are not the mainstream who would be willing to sort of give up their US dollars in favor of a cryptocurrency. And that said, I also believe that there are some significant flaws in the Bitcoin network that cause it to, there are some additional hurdles in terms of like speed and capacity and even fees, things like that.
The fees are crazy, like the gas fees and all that. It's insane.
Yeah. And obviously, something like Ethereum is slightly different in that there's a whole sort of compute component to those networks, the utility token networks. But it's around to stay, and I just think that there are some significant hurdles before it becomes mainstream, and before you start to see banks actually willing to touch it.
I mean, there's got to be some regulatory changes, I think, as well around that. And, I mean, the good news on the regulatory side is the Federal Reserve and the FDIC and OCC and others are recognizing how they have to sort of look around the entire landscape and really figure out ways to continue policy that isn't obsolete, right? And catch up. So I think they're listening, and things will happen. It just is it's slower. Yeah. Out of the two of us, who do you think could be invested in Bitcoin?
I think you answered. The thing that I struggle with cryptocurrency in general is the tax implications. I mean, if you say you put 10 grand in Bitcoin, it grows to 30, and you want to move back into US dollars, you're going to take a 30 for whatever your tax bracket is haircut on it, and so that's the hard part, and for businesses to hold it on their balance sheet is a whole other thing, right? If you're moving money, it's not like you can just move it around like you can USD with zero tax implications. So I think it's, the fascinating, when MicroStrategy and Tesla started putting it on their balance sheet, that's when it kind of got my attention. It was like, oh shit, like for real, they're going to put $1.5 billion of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. But it'll be interesting to see where it heads.
Well, like I said, I mean, there are folks with Bitcoin to spend, and so they would like to spend it, and so there are going to be companies that are going to be willing to take that, as long as they can withstand the risk, and obviously figure out how to deal with the tax situation. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see what the government does about it, though. I mean, the regulation is going to it's a big question mark. For sure. I mean, the government could come in tomorrow and say, this is not happening, and all these people with multiple 7-figure Bitcoin net worths might, not have that anymore, but we'll see.
Yeah.
When you said collectible, all I could think about was like when you would, this is going to trail off of it, when people would, buy those maybe dolls or like action figures and like leave them in the box forever, right? For years, like awaiting. It's like the Star Wars, right? Action figure that you have like 50 years later. You're like, surely this thing is worth.
It's so crazy. More. Are you following the NFT trend?
Yeah. And I was going to say, we've already seen several waves of this, actually, exactly what you're talking about. And in the digital space. And now with NFTs, we see it even more prevalent where, folks are basically holding digital baseball cards.
Right.
70 million bucks for a.
And I think the novelty there is big, but it feels like a bubble. But honestly, I'm somewhat pessimistic on those sorts of things. Yeah. The thing that I do think is valuable is there's some very novel technology behind the scenes with the notion of distributed consensus and the idea that 100%. We can incentivize a network of trustless actors, people who don't know anybody, no one's really agreed to anything, but they're working together to make the system function well. And
did you catch Mark Cuban's talk or thoughts on it?
I've seen bits of it.
Because he essentially said exactly what you just said. I mean, basically his premise is that like this is a bubble, it will crash, but under the hood is some super powerful tech that is not going anywhere.
Right. And so I'm willing to allow for a future that has some major innovations that come out of the cryptocurrency craze.
Yeah.
I'm just not one who's buying Bitcoin with the expectation that in 10 years I'll be able to buy a coffee with it.
Yeah.
For me, it's more about pricing. It's a trading. It's a sort of a trading instrument, like I said. The once you get really down into the technology behind the scenes, it's actually quite fascinating. And one of those things where the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, which is always very exciting. But
it is very exciting. And you're right. The more you dig, the more it's like, whoa, wait. That like it was about a month ago, I guess now. I didn't know what an NFT was 6 weeks ago, you know, and I was like, I'm gonna go figure this shit out. So I went home and it was like 6 weeks ago. I think it snowed or something like that. It was a really terrible weekend. So I spent 48 hours just messing with NFTs, and I put like $500 into OpenSea, and I bought a couple pieces just to get my head around like how it worked, dude. It was cool. Like the tech, and I'm the proud owner of a couple of really neat pieces of art now, you know, that no one else can lay claim to. But under the hood is some really cool tech around smart contracts and to your point, the distributed sort of validation of those contracts. I'll be interested to see where that leads with like real estate and title law and things that are currently now just all done on paper. You know?
Yeah, I think there's potential there. Like I said, it's a novel approach to a problem that has been hard to solve. Yeah, and I personally don't think it works all that well for something like point of sale transactions. Yeah. But certainly works well for things like provenance and seeing the lineage of ownership of things. So
man, you're probably the first person I've ever known that like knew what provenance. I didn't know what provenance was until 2 weeks ago.
Like he's like, this is like geeking out, right? Like this is your world.
So are you familiar with Masterworks?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, so do you know Scott?
I don't.
Okay, so I work for Scott. That was like my first job in the real world, right? And I worked for Virtuamundo back in like 2002, maybe 2002, 2004. It was Virtuamundo, and then he started Ad Knowledge. And actually, all of us, me and my two business partners, Matt and Lauren, and I don't think Casey ever did. We all worked at Ad Knowledge. Yeah. And anyway, Masterworks. I was watching CNBC like a month ago, and Scott was on there talking about Masterworks. Yeah. And so again, I was just like, I'm a tinkerer, so I had an old IRA with like not very much money at all, but I was like, I'm gonna try this. It was just sitting in like some stupid account. It was doing nothing, and so I put it in Masterworks and. Freaking cool, man. Yeah. I mean, you can, and then I watched the term provenance. I'd never heard that term ever.
Yeah, well, first timer. Okay. Yeah. I thought we were talking about Rhode Island. Just saying.
Well, so I watched a great documentary like 2 weeks ago on art, and it was about, I think it was called, what was it called? It was about the big art fraud in New York.
Yeah. With the Nodler. Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly the one. Yeah. What was that called?
Yeah, I can't remember.
But what a great story. But that's when I went down the provenance
rabbit hole.
Rabbit hole of what is provenance. Yeah. But that's a great point. I mean that provenance with blockchain will, it seems like it makes sense.
So the downside though to that is something like, with the Federal Reserve and the banking system as it is today, when there's a bad actor or when there's a mistake, we can unravel that, and it's on the banks. It's on the banks to make customers whole in that regard. Yeah. So if someone accidentally or if someone fraudulently removes money from my account, it wasn't me. Yeah. The bank is basically, it's their obligation to make me whole. Yeah. When we talk about this solid lineage that cannot be changed, obviously that then is no longer an option. So what are you going to do? You're going to wrap that in sort of governing body that's then going to unwind that transaction or something. Well, now suddenly you no longer have a trustless ecosystem, and you have then this like consortium of global financial czars that are making decisions about which transactions can and can't be unraveled, and immediately you get back into a system where that kind of flies in the face of Bitcoin to begin with. So.
Yeah, 100%. We could, I mean, it gets really scary really quick when you start to think about how like if all of these big tech companies Amazon, Twitter, Facebook, if they're the ones with these big blockchain wallets, like what happens if Zuckerberg and Bezos and Bill Gates own all the Bitcoin?
Yeah.
And it's their decision, like how that ecosystem works. That's pretty damn scary.
Yeah.
And you can't just call, like, if you have your money in BlockFi or whatever, you can't like call, and you can't like call them, and there's no customer experience with a situation like that. So
well, those types of centralized control, that's completely antithetical to the
why it exists
the
in the first
entire
place.
The entire aim. And so, once you try to start organizing something to make it useful to the masses, then the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be the challenge from a currency perspective.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
So we'll have to see. Like I said, I think the technology is really interesting. Note that though, people will try to use blockchain and try to apply it to real world problems by saying, well, we're going to have an internal blockchain. It's a blockchain that we're going to sort of own and mechanize within our four walls. Like sort of like the bank could sort of develop some sort of internal blockchain. That is not a blockchain. It is a database at best.
Yeah.
The whole point of the blockchain is that it is decentralized amongst hundreds of thousands of nodes that are just kind of chatting on a protocol and don't have any sort of notion of right or wrong. It just is. And so the idea that there's any sort of benefit to sort of IBM creating a blockchain or even NASDAQ or whatever as they've kind of done, in my opinion, is just merely it's a database. If you own 100% of it, it's just a database.
That's what strikes me so weird about this concept of like the Fed creating like a USD coin or countries making their own coins. It's just sort of like, what's the point? The whole point of the thing is so that it's not tied to a government. Like at that point, it just becomes fiat.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is kind of why I say I'm not sure that the currency use case is all that valuable. I do think there's some potential use cases in the decentralized nature of like of an execution engine or like distributed apps like you see like in the built on Ethereum. Even things like provably correct gambling mechanisms, slot machines, things like that,
interesting,
could be built in the blockchain, and you would have no fear of any sort of malfeasance behind the scenes, people stealing your money.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
But so there are some use cases that are interesting, but I just don't see them in the currency realm. So.
Wow, we could probably do a whole other episode on the whole gambling idea.
Yeah.
That would be cool. Have to do some research on that. All right. Well, man, I appreciate you guys coming in. It is hotter than hell in here.
It is warm. This is called roasting.
Yeah,
right? Like you're roasting us.
We need to get some AC in here. Well, listen, I appreciate having you guys out. I know, it's been way too long. But thank you. Thank you to Ryan for taking care of the production.
Thank you, Ryan.
And we'll wrap it up. But Melissa Eggleston Scott Ramon, NBKC Bank, thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Awesome. Appreciate it.